Welcome to Intuitive Connections, where spirituality and psychology meet to help you be your best and brightest self. I'm your host, Victoria Shaw, and in each episode, I'll help you to awaken your own inner wisdom, step into your power, and live a more divinely inspired life. You're here to let your inner light shine. Are you ready? Let's do this. So, a funny thing has happened to me as of late that I kind of wanted to share because I'm puzzling over it and I find it so fascinating and perhaps even a little bit, it throws me off a little bit. And that is the fact that yours truly, who has spent 2 years receiving all of my guidance in the spoken word, and this is what I do for a living. So when I've given readings to people, I've been doing this now for over a decade. But when I used to teach, I always used to write first. And in fact, when I first started receiving guidance for clients, and I think I've talked about it before on the show, I would actually write. And then I would sit down, I would write pages of notes, and then I would sit down with my clients and I would read them the notes or talk over the notes because it was very hard for me to receive and talk to another person at the same time. I'm better at that now. But anywho, over the last 2.5 years, and I think y'all have heard the story on the podcast if you've listened to some other episodes, I've started to find that my guidance was coming through me, not in the written form, even for myself, but almost always through speaking. And it's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because I was sitting down to write my book, and the book that I've wanted to write for my whole life. And as I sat down to write the book, because I felt like the book was ready to come, nothing was coming through my pencil and everything was coming through my mouth. And so I started recording these little things that would come through. And it occurred to me after a while that they were meant to be a podcast. And so Intuitive Connection Podcast was born. And it has been an amazing adventure, and it continues to be an amazing adventure. And I am so glad that I listened to the nudges of the universe and did not force the issue of writing at that time and allowed myself to just do what felt like it wanted to be done. But now, friends, a funny thing is happening. I have found myself as of late a little blocked in the speaking department and wanting to write like crazy. It is true. And my writing process too is a little bit interesting because it's not like it used to be. I used to sit down at the computer and write. And, I've done that for years. I was an academic psychologist, and even writing my dissertation, believe it or not, my good old dissertation on informal reasoning back, a really long time ago when I was a grad student. I think still, even then, a lot of it was my intuition flowing. I used to completely lose track of time. I used to sit down at the computer because I used to love to write so much that I would have to put a little alarm to go off every hour so I would remember to get up and walk around and use the facilities. This is a true story, and sometimes feed myself, because otherwise I would work for like 6 hours straight. It is true. I know. And so that's how much I've loved writing until like the last few years. But anyway, what's interesting now is not only am I being nudged to write, but I'm being nudged to write in a very particular way. I'm being nudged to write on big pieces of artist paper and markers. It is a true story. Pages and pages and pages. This started this winter of notes. I create all of my classes that way. And now I feel like maybe it's time for me to start writing. And it's so interesting. And the reason I'm talking about this, one, is because I'm kind of marveling at it. I'm marveling at how you think you know who you are, and you think you know what your process is. And sometimes you don't, right? It changes. And one of the things that I've noticed about my life as I listen more and more and more to my inner wisdom is, I don't get stuck as much, or when I'm stuck in one direction, I just treat it as a redirect to go the other way. And that's how I feel right now. I feel like if the episodes are not flowing out of my mouth, and I'm sure some things will continue to flow, I feel kind of flowy right now. But, every time I have an idea, usually I just sit down at the microphone and I get out of the way and I let it come through. And all of a sudden now it's like, no, right. And so I think it's a testament to how we can learn to listen and follow the nudges and recognize that it does not have to be just one way, and that we're always guided.
and that we're guided in a myriad of ways. Again, people often think that guidance is a voice in your head, right? Or guidance is the chills, or guidance is a sign, and it can be all of those things. But sometimes guidance is your personal assistant quitting on you at the time that you're like, oh my God, but you know what? It was actually the perfect thing because she was ready to move on. But I realized that it was time for me too to have a fresh perspective, right? And sometimes we need these little nudges. Sometimes we need these external things to make us wake up and go, oh yeah, look that way. Now with the writing thing, is not quite as clear. This was a very clear situation with the PA where I was thinking for a long time, I was hearing the nudges that it was time to make a change. But I really liked this person and I really enjoyed working with them. And we had 2 amazing years together. And so, as often happens with our intuition, sometimes if the mind is not comfortable with what the nudges are nudging us towards, we tend to shut it down. We tend to ignore it. And sometimes life is very charitable with us and it comes through and it says, all right, tell you what, since you're not listening to the subtle plan, I'm just going to lay this out for you. This is what needs to happen now. And that was the case with that situation. With the writing, I guess it's kind of similar when I think about it, right? I notice that something's not flowing in one direction, and I notice where it is flowing, and I follow that. And I think if every child was taught to listen to their own natural inclinations and say, wow, if it's not flowing in this direction, why don't you feel into where it is flowing? I think it would change our lives, and I think it would change the world. Right? I think it would change everything because, again, we'd start to listen to ourselves again. We'd start to flow with our guidance. We'd start to understand that you don't have to be the person that writes and you don't have to be the person that speaks. And there's not one right way to do things, right? There's only what is right for you personally in this moment now. Right now, perhaps it's sitting down and recording this quick little episode. But probably after I get ready for bed and relax with my crayons and my markers and my big pieces of paper, who knows what might come through. Another nudge for me that it was time to start writing again, and this is hysterical, is not so long ago, I got an email from someone who was responding to a blog I had written probably 3 years ago. And that was probably the last time. I used to do kind of little blogs in my newsletter. And I kind of let that go around the time I started the podcast. But I would do these periodic blogs. And one blog I did in particular, and I think I've even talked about it and referenced it in this podcast. It was around an experience I had where I kept pulling the Tower Tarot card. And I blogged about it, and I left this question of, I'll let you know how it turns out. And that was actually the last blog I ever did. So I guess I never told anyone how it turned out. And she wanted to know. So cool. So I told her and replied to the email. And if you guys email me too with questions, and they're not questions where you want me to give you free intuitive guidance, because I can't do that in an email, my friends, though, please know that I care, and I'm always happy to hear your concerns and send you some love back. But if you have other kinds of questions, or you just want to share your experiences with, the podcast or anything I put out there, please, please, please shoot me an email, because I love it. And I love to know people are listening, and I love to hear what y'all think. And, we have the Facebook group, Intuitive Connection Community too. So if you're on Facebook, join us there, because that is a great place to ask questions. And I do occasionally do some readings over there too. But anyhow, I realized after I got this email, which I thought was really cool because I don't blog on any major platforms. I have no idea how she found it, as always is the case with these cool and random things, was that, again, it felt like another nudge. I think it's time to start writing again, right? And so I'm bringing this up again because I think it's just such a great example of how we can learn to listen to our lives. Learn to listen to the signs, but also recognize, right? Let's look at this. There's some signs. I get a random comment on a blog I did 3 years ago. I'm finding that it's not really flowing for me as much when I have an idea and I want to sit down and talk about it. It seems to flow better for the most part if I write it down on paper. Whereas before, it flowed better if I spoke. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It's just that life is always showing us, right? The direction in which we will experience the most satisfaction, the most joy, the most adventure, where we need to be next, and where we, more importantly, need to be now. And if we listen, it's always showing us. Sometimes life will also edit for us, right? And that's what happened a little bit with my PA, but it happens all the time. And let me tell you a little bit about my experience also hiring my new personal assistant, because it was kind of cool. So I'm a little overwhelmed, and I put feelers out in lots of different places. I put feelers out in some of the podcasting communities on Facebook, where a lot of people who are used to supporting podcasts, so they're called podcast managers, a lot of them lurk around looking for people that are looking for podcasting support. So I put some feelers out there, and I also put some feelers in a local group called San Diego Conscious Community that is more local, but also kind of aligned. And I just, said I'm looking for a PA to do these kinds of things. The last person I worked with wasn't trained in podcasting, so I didn't need that to be a thing. And I kind of put it out there, and I wanted to see how it worked. My next stop was Upwork, but we didn't even get that far because I was flooded with applications. And I noticed a couple of things. I noticed that I really, really enjoyed talking to the younger people from the conscious community, because a lot of these people were so excited to do this. There were a couple people that all reached out to me that were sort of feeling out maybe transitioning in their career or doing different things. And the idea of even having this side job of helping me with this podcast and some of the other projects that I had was like super exciting for them. And then also I noticed that even though I interviewed some great people that had more podcasting experience, the energy wasn't there. And I wanted to like them, and I wanted to do that because something in my mind thought that would be better because they would have the experience and I wouldn't have to teach them what to do. But the energy wasn't as good. It wasn't as good in that direction. But a funny thing happened. So I narrowed it down to about 5 people, and I got a little nudge, a little download, that a really good thing to do would be to give everybody a sample episode and let them do the thing that the PA does and see who I like working with. Because the PA helps me with all sorts of behind the scenes and sometimes not even behind the scenes things. And that way, look, I'll see who I vibe with and how everyone does. And I was getting ready to assign different episodes to different people because I'm sure I've told you guys this before, we batch record way, way, way in advance. So I got a lot of episodes to choose from that, are going to go out months from now. And who knows when this episode will go live. But anyhow, so I got the idea that I was going to do that. And I was getting ready to tell a couple of the people, here's your episode. And the 2 people that were in the podcasting world already both came back to me and said, look, I would love to work on your project. I really enjoyed talking to you, but an existing customer just offered me a bunch more hours, and I don't think I have the, ability to take your project on now. And so there was no problem with that because I recognized immediately I was actually grateful, right? I said, wow, the universe just edited, right? I had 5 people and now I have 3. And also the universe edited in a particular direction, right? It edited out the people that really in my gut, I wasn't sure about, that I wanted to go in that direction. But, I'd interviewed them. I'd invested in them. My brain thought it could be a good idea. But the universe said, no, you don't even need to worry about that. We're editing them out. And it was a bonus point too, because sometimes edits are uncomfortable, but knowing that 2 people have so much work that they're good without me made me obviously feel much better about moving on. And so this happens all the time in life. And, sometimes it's a big edit, like the loss of a partner or the crossing over of a loved one or the loss of a job. So those can be big edits. And if you're going through one of those right now, I just want to send you a bunch of love because I know that can be really, really, really difficult. But also recognize that sometimes these edits are exactly what you need to shift course. For reals. Now, one question that I've been having, right, because I believe in the law of attraction. We talk about that all the time. So I believe that we are constantly co-creating our lives. So if the universe, right, is editing for us, are we editing for us? And the answer to that question to some extent is yes. It's a yes and no kind of answer that I'm getting, right? There are times when we unconsciously, from our fear, self-edit. When you feel like, oh, I can't do that. I do this too. I'll give you a story of my business would always shut down completely in the summer. Okay. And I've probably told this story before on the podcast, but I'm telling it again. So for years, every summer, things would get, crickets or, maybe not that bad, but it would slow down considerably. And yeah, it's true that people go away in the summer. And yeah, all of that is true. But what was really going on, I knew, is that I really like the sun. And the summers in the Northeast, Eastern United States are cold. Not the summers. The summers are warm, but the whole year is pretty cold and the summer is short. That's what I meant to say. So the summers in the Northeast are kind of short and I wanted to enjoy them. And I think I had a fear that if I worked too hard, I would not have enough time to be out in the sun. And so one day I thought to myself, right, am I editing this? Is it my belief that is causing my summers to be slow? And so I said, what if I'm going to say, look, universe, I would like to see what happens if I'm busy during the summer. I'd like to see how it goes. I can always say no. I can always slow things down. But I'm curious to know if I have a busy summer, if I'm still going to be okay, if I'm still going to like it, if I'm still going to get enough sun. That summer that I set that intention, I had a wait list the entire summer. The entire summer. It was one of the busiest periods of my career. Right? And so it goes to show you, yes, we can edit our lives from our limiting beliefs. And we can also be edited by what serves our highest and greatest purpose. So it's a matter of always realigning. You don't have to ask, is this my mind or is this, because if it's happening now, it's perfect. Whether you edited it because you feel like it's going to be too much or it got edited because it's going to be too much. Right? It doesn't really matter because whatever's happening in the moment now, the only question you really need to ask is, all right, what do I feel called to do next? What do I feel called to do now? How do I feel called to respond to what is happening in the now? That's the only question you ever need to ask. So you don't really need to ask, how did I get here? What did I do wrong? Those are mind questions, I promise you. But you can also tune in and say, from this moment now, please show me the highest and greatest outcome. Please show me where I want to grow and expand, right? Please show me what's ready to release. And your life will show you. And the nudges will show you. And sometimes the voice in your head will tell you. And that, I think, is how our intuition works, right? And that is how I think, right? Again and again, we learn to flow with life. Because really, to me, intuition is all of the nudges, all of the ways in which we learn to flow with instead of working against life. It means we surrender to life. It means we trust whatever's happening in the now is correct. It means that we learn to listen more deeply and always ask, how can I be in deeper alignment? Or am I in alignment? Or help me be in alignment. Actually, the third one is really the charm, to set that intention to be in alignment with our soul as much as possible. By asking the question, right, what would love do now? That's a really good question. And that's one that doesn't typically get us too much into our heads. And also listening to the nudges, because we get them all the time. And trusting that whatever we encounter on our path, one way or another, is here to serve us. And the real question is, and the real gold is in quieting down, tuning in, and really figuring out what is the most aligned and inspired way to respond. So I'm going to sign off just about now and get myself ready to snuggle by the fire and maybe do a little bit more writing, or maybe not, because maybe the inspiration tonight was meant to come through my vocal cords rather than my writing hand. Who knows? But I just wanted to share because I think, again, when we listen more deeply to our intuition, we never know where it's going to take us. And I think it's always somewhere pretty darn fine. All right. Thank you all for tuning in, and namaste.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you found joy, strength, inspiration, and clarity from today's episode. If you'd like to learn more and connect with an amazing group of like-minded souls, please join us over on Facebook in the Intuitive Connection Community Facebook group, where we explore these topics in deeper detail, have additional live teachings, and host Facebook Lives with our amazing guests. I hope to see you there. And of course, if you want to learn more about me or the work that I do, please check out my webpage, victoriashawintuitive.com. Thank you so much again, and namaste.